It was a much better year this year than we've had, probably the best year we've had in about 5 years. Now, part of that was a deliberate approach that we discussed last spring about being a little bit more open with the topics. And we did get a variety of papers that I think it inspired things. Also, of course, with the dynamic environment that we've lived in for the last, with the new administration, obviously a lot of people are very interested in having their input because they see some of the changes to civil affairs and we want to write these type of thought-provoking papers. So we, as opposed to the last couple of years where we barely had enough to put together the book that we published 5 papers in. This year we actually had about 14 submissions and we narrowed those down. The committee did a great job of scoring them, debating them, and coming up with the top 5, which are going to be presented by the authors today. And I hope you all, take stock of that, and then we're going to vote and see which one is first, second, third, etc. And we did also, I will note, double the prize money this year. So we're trying to hopefully make that an additional incentive. And so with that, you're probably tired of hearing me talking. Let's hear these very astute authors start talking. So we'll start with Organizing for Large-Scale Combat Operations, the Consolidation of Civil Affairs Forces at the Division by Major Shawn M. Blaydes, Major J. Mike Teeter, and Mr. Walter Ellison II.
And sir, I'm not sure I shared with you earlier in email, but I have a way that you're going to vote at the end. So after the last paper, you'll get a Zoom voting capability that'll pop up on the screen, and you all can vote for your top 3.
Mm-hmm. Right. So who's taking the lead for our triumvirate of authors here? Major Blaydes?
Yes, sir. And as soon as I can get my slides up and presented, we'll kick
I'm
off.
seeing them already. Yeah.
Are you?
Looks good, Shawn.
Outstanding. There we go. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Major Shawn Blaydes, and I'm fortunate enough to currently be serving as a senior trainer at the National Training Center. My co-authors are Major Mike Teeter, who is the Deputy G9 at the 18th Airborne Corps, and Mr. Walter Ellison, who's the Information Warfare Planner at the National Training Center by day, and then he is one of our USA KPOC Civil Affairs First Sergeants serving with the 1004th over in 1st Training Brigade. We'd be remiss not to thank our counterparts, the Mission Command Training Program, and the Joint Multinational Readiness Center, and Proponent, who have supported us with hard conversations and a willingness to discuss future concepts and operations. Today, we want to share with you a vision of what we think civil affairs might do as far as how they're arrayed and how they conduct operations across the future battlefield. We know that battlefield is changing. Brigades are getting lighter, more lethal, and they're deliberately working to reduce both their physical and electromagnetic footprints. Quite simply, they want less people and less platforms. The proliferation of drones and other enabling technologies has resulted in a division close area that has never been more lethal. We're still postured to fight on a battlefield that doesn't exist. We're organized for counterinsurgency, and we've learned a lot about counterinsurgency and competition in the last quarter century, but we need to relook how we're postured and what we're training for if we're going to be prepared for that next war. As we build capabilities, we have to redefine ourselves based on our Corps' ability to directly contribute to large-scale combat operations. The guidance is clear. From the War Department, the Department of the Army, and the Marine Corps, they are all pursuing force design and equipping updates to fight and win against a near-peer or peer adversary on an increasingly lethal battlefield. If we don't redefine our function, force alignment, and priorities, we may be left behind. Proponent has done a great job of reorganizing doctrine over the past couple of years, but we need to continue this evolution and actively work to educate our force so that we are prepared. We currently work under the assumption that CA companies will support brigades, while battalions are supporting divisions and CA brigades are supporting corps. But posturing isn't quite that simple. You can't just give one of each to everyone. That places a preponderance of our forces in the division area of operations forward in the close area, where the terrain is still rapidly shifting, populations have gone to ground, and opportunities to nest consolidation objectives are limited. The current ad hoc assignment of Brigade S9s and Division G9s from the supporting unit has left a void in leadership for that element. They try to perform two jobs simultaneously, and from what we've seen at combat training center rotations and sometimes at Mission Command Training Program, it doesn't work well. We need to relook how we're assigning those. Furthermore, those staff officers that have been plugged in last moment don't have systems and processes established with that unit. We got to start looking at training above the civil affairs company level. For years, we focused on team proficiency and excellence, and we have some great people in this regiment. We have excellent teams. But those planning functions and the ability to create a long-term effect are going to rely on good planning at the company, battalion, and brigade level. We need to develop a concept for how we're going to conduct operations. The Army thrives on planning factors and templates. Our maneuver fires and sustainment counterparts, that's what they do. They look at the book when they want to understand how to conduct CAO and what they're expected to do. By putting it to paper, it allows us to provide that reference and hold them accountable as we try to assist them. And then finally, we need to define transitions. The lack of a common civil information management system has been a long-standing issue. If we establish a mechanism, at least, for how civil information is transitioned across the operational framework, it'll ensure information is being transferred to higher adjacent and follow-on units, although it's not specifying how. By the way, Alpha Company 451st CA Battalion just participated in our first transformation and contact rotation here at NTC, and they used the Maven Smart system to great effect. We sent our observations up to the use KPOC G357 and fully recommend integration to solve that problem. Now, remember that we're assuming the division close area is going to be the most violent, fast-moving, and rapidly evolving portion of the battlefield. It's not the time for civil engagement here. There's no time for tea. Hopefully, we'll benefit from well-developed networks developed by our soft civil affairs elements and our use KPOC elements conducting operations and competition. If we do, they can leverage that for civil network engagement through remote advise and assist in the deep area. But it's most important that they transition these networks to either core or division so we can leverage them in the division close and then rear areas. And the division close area, we should largely limit our civil affairs operations to targeted civil reconnaissance for limited time and duration. This is to validate conditions of infrastructure, networks, populations, and then inform what resources will be allocated. This information is critical to the civil information management section, the functional specialist at battalion and brigade, and the civil affairs planning teams who are allocating these resources and developing plans for operations. The units operating in this area don't need to be assigned OPCON or TACON to the brigade. Right now, the brigades want to be alleviated of planning requirements and in actions that don't relate to fires, maneuver, sustainment. The Army is supporting that. We can put those responsibilities on division and allow them to fall under the C2 of the battalion by moving them back and assigning them only in general support so they can cross that rear boundary when needed. So as we conduct civil reconnaissance, we report to higher. In the division rear area, we can focus on minimum essential stability operations tasks, food, water, medical, shelter, and security. This also moves a preponderance of our CA forces to that rear area where they can conduct operations to consolidate. While we might rapidly solve some problems in the division close area, the rear is where we need to focus. It should be the focus for all divisional civil affairs operations. Core might be addressing minimum essential stability operations tasks in the core rear, or they might have the opportunity to begin stability operations, focused on civil security and civil control, which are preconditions for all other stability operations tasks. Apologies. So as we talk about coordinating and synchronizing these operations and handover of information, we need to master the control measures that go with it and start addressing them normally in planning and operations. We'll be pushing people, platform, and fires and supplies forward, and we'll see a corresponding flow of people, damaged platforms, detainees, and information towards the rear. While we tend to hyper-focus on population and resource control with dislocated civilian operations, I'm really most concerned about the information and that flow upward and rearward that allows us to align resources and plan those PRC measures. If we don't master this, we stand to lose that information as units move and conduct a never-ending series of civil reconnaissance operations to understand problems that were already defined. Doctrinal concepts like the reconnaissance handover line or battle handover line gives us an example of how to manage this information handover. It specifies what units are responsible for handing information over and responsibility over to follow-on units and at what time that's anticipated. Correspondingly, we have coordination points. That small circle with the X inside of it directs units to talk to each other. And that'll result in the sharing of information across boundaries. In my opinion, these belong on all graphical depictions of civil affairs operations. It'll help us as we try to consolidate gains. When supported by clear civil information requirements, which are a required output of civil preparation of the battlefield, this provides guidance for subordinate units to focus their operations and answer the supported commander's critical information requirements so that we can consolidate gains and actually lock them in, building towards something that'll matter in the long term. We have 5 recommendations to help with this, and we acknowledge that there are holes in the swing here. I don't think one person in this Corps is going to find a complete solution to any problem, but if we work together and enhance these, we can get to something good. So as far as doctrine is concerned, we should update FM 357 in the next revision and address network handover, priorities of work, and how we conceptualize the operational framework so we can explain it to maneuver commanders. Maneuver commanders are the primary audience for FM 357. As far as organization, the G9 section should be restored at divisions. There's some problems here with who's going to be the bill pair, and everybody's sensitive to it right now. But it is essential to have a standing staff section that has TTPs and SOPs and relationships across that staff. Otherwise, they get pushed to the side. It's easy to be the unit in the corner when you show up. You're like, hey, I'm here to help you, but nobody understands what you do because you don't have that pre-existing relationship. This doesn't mean we need to reestablish Brigade S9s. If we consolidate division, it reduces the number of billets we have to increase. Training. We have got to get units out to CTCs for division in the dirt rotations, and we have got to get full participation from the MTO assigned personnel at warfighters. This last year, we saw a civil affairs battalion come to a division in the dirt rotation, and they brought a CLT and a CAPT, and they were staffed with some of the best soldiers I've met. But they weren't prepared to conduct operations. And because they didn't have a SIM section, the functional specialty section, and other elements of that battalion headquarters, they couldn't perform their MET tasks. And it left them struggling trying to do all of those sections jobs simultaneously. And it was long nights and hard conversations. If we look at a frequency of once every 3 years for active component and once every 5 years for reserve component participation, it's realistic and attainable, but may need to be refined based on our rotational obligations and our reset periods. Leadership and education. We have got to get our majors to ILE, and we have got to get our master sergeants to master leaders course. This is where we train MDMP. The doctrine updates we've seen over the past 2 years have been great, but folks still haven't been educated on them at the higher level. I have never met a civil affairs soldier coming out of the qualification course that wasn't able to perform civil affairs team tasks. But we have a gap. We don't have formal education to teach the civil affairs peculiar tasks for MDMP, except for those that go to ILE or MLC. They get some training and then they're able to master the process. They're able to talk competently to their peers on the brigade, division, corps staffs that they find themselves assigned to, and they're able to lean into the processes. We need to start holding folks accountable, signing them up for ILE or MLC within 1 year's selection for promotion. We understand that doesn't work for everybody, but a 1 year deferral should be sufficient. Personnel. We need to fill these staff sections with ILE complete and MLC complete soldiers. That way they can exercise these functions, develop good plans, and then push them down so that our units have good guidance. We're coming out of an era where we gave broad guidance and we issued frameworks as opposed to specific tasks a lot of times. As we look at conducting maneuver warfare, we have to look at assigning tasks and how they're nested across the operational framework. And sir, that concludes our brief.
All right. Good job, Shawn. Appreciate it. All right, so we're going to go on to the second paper. We've got the Civil Affairs Redefined Image Model and CARI Model and Artificial Intelligence by Colonel Mark Bongioanni.
I started sharing my slides now. Can we see
Yep,
them yet?
we see it. We're good to go.
Hey, Mark,
Okay.
you just put it in slideshow, though.
Yep,
You're in
roger.
non-presentation. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. Colonel Marco Bongioanni here. Appreciate the Civil Affairs Association and certainly continuing to gather here yearly, even in spite of the challenges this year. But great to be selected, certainly with some other really, I know, interesting and informative papers. So looking forward to hearing the presentations and the symposium already. I think it's had some great topics. Hope to be able to add to that today. While I am a civil affairs practitioner, I'm currently on ADOS working with U.S. Army Recruiting Command, so doing some interesting work. Been outside the CA community for a few years. But my personal passion is in human behavior and applied psychology. I work for the Department of Veterans Affairs in my civilian job. I'm a mental health provider. I've been there about 15 years. And so I always try to weave in sort of my personal interests into where I think civil affairs can have touch points. And so that's sort of the premise for what you'll see today. And I'll go ahead and move forward. So just brief agenda. So the problem set that I kind of tried to look at was framing it within Donald Rumsfeld's famous quote of, there are known knowns and unknown unknowns. And really, I sort of tried to look at what the association kind of modeled this year in its request for papers and trying to establish that effective narrative. And how to really redefine ourselves. I think it's been a challenge, certainly for civil affairs for many years. We deal with a very complex variable in military operations, the human dimension, right? Humans are messy, impulsive, unpredictable. And because of this, I think a lot of the rigid sort of military mission analysis models, whether it's MDMP, PMISI-PT, A-scope, some of the ones that are more tailored, let's say, to CA operations, I think fall short of providing that so what civil component analysis because of that rigidity. And then it affects our ability to inform senior leaders in their decision making, that whole relevancy fight that we often struggle with. So my thought is we need to look to psychological models that are likely more suitable to illustrate where gaps exist in order not to only redefine ourselves, but also be able to inform senior leaders what is the so what ultimately, especially as we, again, are planning for operations in the LISCO environment. So we're going to call this model the Civil Affairs Redefined Image or the CARI model. And what I proposed is we use something called the Johari window, right? So it's a model used in psychology to illustrate individuals' perception of themselves and others. Joseph Luft and Harrington Ingram developed it in the 1950s. It's been tested in many research settings, and I think is a great model to often illustrate this. I use it also in clinical work. And sort of what I kind of did was I tweaked it to civil affairs, right? It's a nice model because it visualizes well sort of the goal that I think we're looking for is how to redefine ourselves. And so it's utilized to help understand areas that are blind, hidden, or unknown to practitioners of the human domain, right? And so in the CARI model, we can see the 4 quadrants: open, blind, hidden, and unknown. How do you push the boundaries of those quadrants, right, further from the open into the blind or into the hidden or into the unknown? And really, it's to capture our self-awareness gaps, right? That's what this model can help with by simply asking those questions. Ultimately, it's the boundaries of the CA practitioners' knowns and unknowns, right? That's what we're trying to push forward here. So again, kind of utilize this model, we're calling it the CARI model, to sort of ask those questions initially. And we can kind of see those here on the next slide. So there are some limits to the model, really, and that's the self-awareness gap, right? Even though it's a model to help describe self-awareness and allow one to become more self-aware, self-awareness in itself is a gap, because in order to increase our own self-awareness, we need to often have a certain degree of it to start with, right? And so it's challenging to accurately understand ourselves if we start already from a skewed self-perception of ourselves, right? Again, a little bit more of a clinical wording there, right? But I think it applies to all of us, whether we're civil affairs or something else within the military, or as as just humans, right? And so, again, within the framework of what I specifically looked at in this paper was how do we help CA practitioners kind of answer these questions of themselves, right? Asking the right questions, being open to understanding feedback received from others, the observations of others, providing a shared discovery with others, being open to identifying ways to self-disclose and provide constructive feedback to others, and ultimately accepting to embrace self-discovery. So the CARI model can help us kind of ask these questions of ourselves, right, and allow our ability to sort of understand that perhaps self-awareness gap. But how do we close that gap even further, right? That's where we kind of now enter into the next sort of segment of introducing artificial intelligence, right? So as I looked at the CARI model, I saw again that gap that couldn't necessarily be fully closed by us alone as individuals, just asking these questions. AI, I think, provides tools to perhaps push the boundaries even further. And so that's where I wanted to kind of connect in AI to this, perhaps in order to then provide some of those .mil PF recommendations. So enter artificial intelligence. The CARI model now has allowed us to ask those questions of ourselves, but AI really is going to provide, again, further closure to some of those awareness gaps. So I think all of us probably within this symposium here know that AI's application has become, a center point certainly for multiple U.S. government efforts. The White House publishing earlier this year, Winning the Race, America's AI Action Plan, had some details, sort of pillars in there that it discussed. Department of War certainly has recognized for some time the importance of AI. The Transformation and Contact Initiative that Secretary and the chief of on the Army side have specifically championed, certainly is heavily leveraging AI and other types of tools. Even within this forum, it's been no stranger to civil affairs issue papers over the last several years. In fact, since 2019, I went back and looked, there were references to AI in every single issue paper that was produced, whether, again, it was for significant works that were focused at AI or just references to AI within the context of the work that was being done. Several senior CA leaders have spoken to us also in previous forums discussing, again, the importance of AI in civil affairs and how can we best leverage it. So it has the potential certainly to help us with these known knowns, and it can also provide important self-awareness with the unknown unknowns. So one model in particular that I've personally become a great fan of, and I think is perhaps a path to connecting again the self-awareness gaps to where an AI model could help fill some of that, is Ask Sage. And so Ask Sage is a Army AI enterprise program of record. It is a large language model workspace that can be leveraged perhaps to close some of those self-awareness gaps. I am an AI novice by all means. And so I really have kind of just over the last several months of being here working at USEREC, been able to embrace leveraging something like Ask Sage on a daily basis. What does it do? It applies ChatGPT, Google Gemini type models. What's really nice about Ask Sage is because it's an now AI, Army AI enterprise system of record, it can operate within the CUI environment, right? So you can freely upload documents, regulations, policies, allow it to leverage those in the model without having any concern of spillage. It's available now free for all CAC users and .mil email addresses. Initially, when it was launched, it was open only to the Joint Staff and certain combatant commands. It's now been rolled out for all Army users. And I believe I speak well when I say there are other joint partners as well, other services that are leveraging now Ask Sage as well. I believe Air Force has it and certainly have leveraged it within, again, the larger department efforts. Has a low barrier for entry. There's no complex downloads needed. It operates right online. It's sort of centrally managed from a token standpoint, right? You can request more tokens if needed. That helps control the bandwidth. And I think the three basic steps for all practitioners, if we were to look at it from a very basic level, is to understand how you create a persona, right? So if I was going to do that within the CA framework, I might say, I am the CJ9 operating in a Joint Task Force headquarters, 3-star command with some description of my duty assignment, right? So I've created now my persona. I'm going to allow Ask Sage to frame the outputs that I might query within the prompts within that framework. I'm creating a workspace also within Ask Sage, and there are some various ways to do that where you can create projects or workspaces specifically for initiatives that you might be working on. And then, like I mentioned, the prompt engineering is an important part of leveraging any AI or a large language model tool, because the better you engineer your prompt, the better outputs that you'll receive. So again, Ask Sage, a possible tool to help close, again, some of that self-awareness gap. Sort of 3 .mil PFP recommendations that I've come up with: doctrine, personnel, and training, education. A lot of wording I know on this slide, but let's look quick at doctrine. CARI would see the doctrine sort of framework as a blind area to civil affairs, because others know that AI could help CA redefine itself, but CA may not know itself, right? We think we're still struggling right now. I think I speak also well when I say that there's no mention right now of AI in current CA doctrine, right? There certainly are papers that have been written about it. There is emerging use of it on the battlefield and some of the training centers, but there's not a core doctrine necessarily connecting right now civil affairs and how we leverage AI tools. We have to have a basic understanding, I think, of data science, right, as CA practitioners and leaders. It doesn't mean you have to be an ORSA, right? I'll talk a little bit more about what they do in a second. But there are tools out there, like from the Army Center of Lessons Learned, recently published Commanders and Staff Guide to Data Literacy, which I think every staff officer should certainly pen through and understand. We have to understand what the data science pyramid, I think, also looks like and where CA fits in that, right? So data science is about, collecting, connecting, counting, creating that common operating picture, and then providing some type of guidance to a commander, right? There are various individuals in that pyramid that also provide support at those different levels. So figuring out where we stand in that as civil affairs may be certainly important for our doctrine to explore. Let's shift over to training and education. So the CARI model would see training and education as an unknown area, right? Neither CA nor others in the defense and military establishment currently know how to accomplish this. It's a nascent area still, right? We're still learning about how to train ourselves in AI. Certainly there are individuals that have excelled and are working in not only the government space, but in the private sector. But I think just understanding as a CA leader, like what types of courses are out there. AI2C, the Army's Artificial Intelligence Integration Center, has a hub now at Carnegie Mellon that they've been working for several years. Have some great courses that you can take out of there. There are online ones that were hosted on the TRADOC portal, now the T2Com portal, to be able to do those also virtually. Practitioners, I think, need to know how to access AI tools, right? We just looked at Ask Sage as a potential model for that. And these should be tools also that you can use in this UI environment. So, we all, I think, are aware of the open source AI tools too. Those are nice for maybe using for yourself at home or on your cell phone, but not necessarily something to use officially due to potential concerns with data spillage. So, the military now has created environments like Ask Sage for you to leverage and use. Let's shift to personnel. CARI would see personnel as hidden, right? CA knows well how to integrate and leverage unique skill sets in its civil component engagement. We have all sorts of different resources that are assigned to our headquarters to do that, but we don't necessarily know how to integrate those, right? We need more personnel that are skilled at mapping and relating data, right? I think historically, during operations that we saw in the past 20 plus years, we leveraged, let's say, 12 Yankees, right, our geospatial engineers very effectively to map the civil component on a terrain model. We need individuals that can map data now, right? It's a different skill set. FA49, your ORSAs are historically been the experts at that. They tend to be at your larger headquarters. There are also now moves to create an enlisted MOS, 49 Bravo for that. There also have been exercises recently, right? Mojave Falcon at Hunter Liggett earlier this year, a large, particularly Compo 3 exercise that had nestings with an NTC rotation as well. There were individuals that were handpicked specifically to create an operational capacity for the commander there to assist in their decision making, leveraging AI. So I think we need to determine as CA leaders and force management decision makers, I don't know if we need these necessarily resources assigned at CA units or just task organized to us when we go and prepare for missions. That I think is a decision that has to be made, but we need to understand how to map and relate data as civil affairs operators and how to make sense sense of it and ultimately come up with recommendations based off of it. You can see that leads into my areas of further investigation. I don't believe we have a lot of experienced experts right now in how to prompt engineer within a CA framework. That would be a tool that would be great to be created for CA practitioners, something that could allow us to, again, shed light on those blind, hidden, and unknown parts that the CARI model sort of exposed. And I think we need to leverage things also like Vantage. There was a discussion earlier in one of the presentations about like what platforms can we pull data from, right? So Vantage is the Army's platform for data analytics, right? Is the system of record. Other joint services are using it similarly, right? It ties to Palantir and many other resources. And so understanding and being able to leverage Vantage not only for creating consolidated workspaces, but being able to connect data from a whole variety of different streams to be able to then make sense of it, create that common operating picture, and then ultimately give recommendations to commanders. So call to action and conclusion. Again, we need an understanding. We need to be able to ask the right questions. We need to understand feedback. We need to provide shared discovery. We need to identify ways to self-disclose and provide constructive feedback to others and accept the need to embrace self-discovery, right? Only then truly, I think, we'll be able to redefine ourselves and be able to anticipate and meet current requirements and anticipate future imperatives, that is. Pairing AI and large language models with something like the CARI model perhaps gives us, again, that ability to operationalize a human dimension and sort of close the CA practitioner's self-awareness gap that I think is really a struggle historically for civil affairs and shed light in areas, again, that are blind, hidden, or unknown. It really creates a window to reimagine and I think is going to be an important factor for further consideration in the future, especially if we're going to be able to, again, maintain relevancy with senior leaders in the LISCO environment. So I'll pause and turn it back over to the presenters. Thank you.
All right, Marco. Hey, appreciate it. Glad to see you again active in the community. Keep it up.
Oh,
All right.
thanks,
With that, we're going to move on to the third paper, which is Should the United States Adopt a CIMIC Model of Civil Affairs for Homeland Defense? Presented by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Boudreau, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aniton, and Lieutenant Colonel Peter Schäfer.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. May I have a comms check, please?
Yep, you're good.
Terrific. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Aniton and I were pleased to collaborate on this paper with Lieutenant Colonel Peter Schäfer from Germany. Some of you met him on the first panel this morning. And though he doesn't have a direct stake in this discussion because he already operates under a CIMIC framework, he was nevertheless willing to provide subject matter expertise in our research and in the paper that we developed. Please take note of the disclaimer on the first slide. All right, well, we developed our thesis based on the Trump administration's substantial policy shift to a focus primarily on homeland defense. This represents a sea change in defense policy because from the War of 1812 to modern times, with the exception of Pearl Harbor, the United States has had the luxury of fighting wars as an away game, to borrow a phrase from Colonel Holschek. To be clear, as of today, there is no formal requirement. The 2025 National Defense Strategy has not been released, though there are classified development guidelines. And so we believe that there's a strong implication that there is or will be a civil affairs requirement. But as we sit here today, we don't have black and white on that just yet. Nevertheless, being forward thinkers, we went ahead with our research question, which is how does civil affairs fit into that particular mission set? And how can civil affairs capabilities be best utilized in the scenario of an attack on the homeland? What we found is the silence was deafening. And so our next question became, if there is a capabilities gap, should we build recommendations from scratch, or is there a reasonable facsimile available that we can use? We believe that the NATO CIMIC model is an obvious choice for a starting point. So turning from requirements to authorities, again, there are substantial gaps. So first, on the positive side, it's customary for a nation defending itself from attack to go into a state of martial law. The United States has no formal definition of martial law, though one can easily argue that as a matter of constitutional or common law, the authority does exist for the president to declare martial law in, for example, a World War II scenario where Pearl Harbor was attacked. Nevertheless, defining martial law in the law would be helpful. On the negative side, we do discuss in our paper 2 federal laws which put substantial limitations on the use of troops acting under federal authorities, specifically the Posse Comitatus Act and the Insurrection Act. In our paper, we next turn to discuss existing authorities and particularly service doctrine for employing Title 10 and Title 32 troops. As they exist right now, service regulations don't contemplate use of CA beyond what we typically see in a natural disaster situation like hurricane response. So we're all familiar with FEMA and how that operates, and what, like I said, in a hurricane scenario, how the military can integrate potentially civil affairs capabilities. But beyond that, in a situation of Homeland Defense, we just don't have doctrine that addresses it. So what do we do now? Well, turning from where we are to where we might want to be, we next discuss in our paper NATO CIMIC doctrine, and this is the meat of our discussion. As we have in bold on this slide, CIMIC promotes unity between military and civil actors for homeland defense. So, looking holistically at the CIMIC structure, it is built on the idea of NATO nations using civil-military integration at the national level, and then looking outward to employment in the collective defense of other NATO nations. It begins with an inward focus and then looks out. U.S. civil affairs doctrine just looks outward. So we can think of examples from World War II to Vietnam to the global war on terror, where civil affairs was used during conflict and in the post-conflict phases to achieve stabilization goals. But returning to our earlier catchphrase, that has always been an away game. Our paper discusses various CIMIC principles, such as resilience through civil preparedness, civil emergency planning, and human security principles, and draws applications for the U.S. We also discuss cross-cutting topics of protection of civilians, women, peace, and security, and cultural projection, which have a lot of crossover with the United States doctrine. But in the CIMIC context, that's where we're drawing our information from. We provide additional nuance and considerations for improvement to U.S. civil affairs doctrine. So basically bridging that gap, if indeed the CIMIC model is something that's worthwhile for the United States to consider adopting, and we suggest that it is, then those are topics that we can build on. Returning to U.S. authorities, our paper discusses existing Department of War policies relating to Homeland Defense. However, this section of the paper, frankly, it needs some work. We got some excellent feedback from the review committee, and we'll discuss that towards the end. And for the last part of our paper, prior to our recommendations, we built on a case study from the Ukraine to talk about CIMIC implementation and what that would look like in the United States. So Ukraine is a relatively recent adopter of the CIMIC framework, coming really from 2018 to 2020 to present. And so the war with Russia has some important lessons for overcoming friction points. Based on our research, we believe the United States would be in a similar place in a lot of ways to in a substantial homeland defense scenario to overcoming some of the same challenges that the Ukrainians did. There's this terrific report put out by the Center for Civilians in Conflict, and that was our primary resource for drawing on lessons learned and things that we can build into United States doctrine development. All right, here's a summary of our recommendations. I won't dwell on them, but we wanted to share these with you just to let you know where we're heading. And obviously, we're going to make some updates between now and publication. So we think these things speak for ourselves, right? We need clarifications to the law. So first of all, there's a martial law gap. What do we do if the homeland is attacked? What are the authorities? Are there going to be lawsuits? Are there going to be other challenges? Is Congress going to be aligned? Are local authorities going to be aligned? So we need clarification in the law. We have these additional recommendations. Hey, let's start building into, if we maintain a FEMA structure, what are liaison relationships going to look like? Do we need more personnel at each of the cognizant combatant commands that would be most relevant potentially in a homeland defense scenario? We looked at also our reserve components, right? So not only reserve, but National Guard. These provide additional capabilities. And because the National Guard is heavily involved in state disaster response already, maybe they should be a lead. So there's definitely room for additional thought and development on our end. And we look forward to moving this conversation forward and well past the paper publishing deadlines. To touch quickly on review committee feedback received so far. So one of the recommendations that we look at employment of civil affairs capabilities in disaster response, specifically Hurricane Andrew. There are some excellent after actions and other resources that we're able to draw on. And so we plan to develop our analysis with those. In addition to that, looking at existing capabilities, looking at expanding either training or applications of those forces to particular missions. And then finally, stepping outside the CA lane, looking at, hey, what have we done previously in things that relate to the civilian component or civilian participants in Homeland Defense that weren't necessarily or aren't necessarily directly in the lane of civil affairs. However, we think that all that can inform us in developing doctrine as we progress. So in conclusion, our paper does not formally track the .mlpf format because, frankly, we don't have specific requirements identified yet. And because of that, it's difficult to come up with .mlpf recommendations in a fully informed way. That said, this is a lot of fun, and it gave the authors a chance to really think outside the box because, like we said, war is an away game. We don't do that at home. So for civil affairs, there's lots to learn and think about. Here's our contact information. Hopefully these slides will be shared with anyone, and we welcome any and all feedback. Thanks, everyone.
All right, great. Well, thank you for that. Very thought-provoking. Let's go ahead and go on to our fourth paper, Seizing the Initiative, the Case for Civil Affairs-Enabled Unity of Command in U.S. Stabilization Efforts by Mr. Ryan McCannell.
Okay, all right, and good to see everyone again. So let me see. The idea for this paper came from two main sources. The first was Seth Middleton's article, recent article in the Small Wars Journal that was called, quote, "Non-Military Foreign Assistance is Now DoD's Problem," unquote, and Dr. Nadia Shadlow's terrific book, War and the Art of Governance. The latter in particular got me thinking, what if we replace the unity of effort approach towards stabilization with a DoD-led unity of command? And what would that mean for civil affairs? And, sorry, I got to figure out how to do both of these things at once here. Oh, there we go. All right, perfect. That was my biggest stressor, was trying to figure out how to advance the slides. So anyway, bottom line up front, I believe that the DoD should seize the initiative to develop a new strategic paradigm based on military-led unity of command for U.S. post-conflict stabilization efforts. To do so would require DoD leaders and planners to acknowledge that success in warfare depends on the consolidation of gains, so stabilization impacts warfighting, but that those interventions should be more limited and time-bound than past nation-building efforts, which aimed at remaking entire societies and economies. So warfighting should impact stabilization. In that vein, it's time to acknowledge that the unity of effort that we've tried so hard to achieve over the past 25 years has actually complicated and sometimes undermined our strategic responses. That's why I believe that putting DoD in charge of command and control would make operations more coherent, efficient, and risk tolerant. But it would also require the DoD, and particularly the Army, to man, train, and equip stabilization operations in an integrated part of irregular warfare tactics, techniques, and procedures. Doing so would potentially frustrate our competitors and adversaries' efforts to reap those gains for themselves. It may also give them one less reason to provoke a conflict in the first place if they sense that we're cleaning up what has been a historically very frustrating and ad hoc approach to post-conflict stabilization. When it comes to the civil affairs, the implications and opportunities for civil affairs, I think those are potentially pretty enormous and get to the redefining of civil affairs. If commanders were to be given C2 over a diverse range of military and civilian actors, then the civil affairs community could realize its advantage as key enablers and subject matter experts in civil military operations, civil reconnaissance, and relationship management. But getting there requires civil affairs voices and planners at the table to make the case for greater DoD leadership. That's been a big theme of what we've been talking about all day. So why should the DoD embrace a leadership role for stabilization, particularly now? There's a few key reasons. First, because as we've been discussing all day long, the interagency ain't what it used to be. And as a result, the Stabilization Assistance Review and the Global Fragility Act, which previously informed DoD policy and our way of working together on stabilization, no longer seem relevant under the second Trump administration. But the silver lining is the opportunity to adopt a DoD-led unity of command model and replace what Dr. Shadlow has called the divide and fail model, which is the parallel, often competing civilian and military structures that proved so ineffective in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Second, and connected to this, is Shadlow's finding that over most of American history, like it or not, the U.S. Army and Marines have often been the ones that have been responsible for occupation and stabilization responsibilities, regardless of whether they are ready for that and have trained for it or not. So why, and the reason for that is because they're the only ones often who have the capacity and capabilities, range of capabilities to be able to do that, lacking any other planning. And so why not actually then get ready for that and realize the economies of scale that could come along with cross-training stabilization along with the other irregular warfare capabilities. The third and most nuanced rationale for this is that there's a growing gap right now between the philosophy of America First foreign policy with its emphasis on burden sharing and avoiding lengthy commitments to nation building or humanitarian interventions, and the implications of current and potential future operations. Those range from potential successes if, say, the pressure on the Iranian or North Korean regimes forces them to implode, to the other extreme if one considers what an invasion of, say, Venezuela or Nigeria might look like, or how it might unfold. In the middle of that range are contingencies like post-conflict Gaza and Ukraine, both of which we've talked a lot about today, where even if the US remained indirectly involved, there's still a great need to think and act in terms of stabilization with a military C2 lens applied. In all of these cases, civil affairs personnel have huge advantages in terms of training, outlook, regional expertise, and thematic specialization, not to mention the hands-on skills that you all possess across a range of public administration requirements. Like it or not, the US will quite possibly need the Army and the Marines to lead stabilization operations again in the near future. And commanders will need civil affairs more than ever to plan, support, and execute those missions. So looking at the .mil PFP, much of my paper details how to implement these. But for me, it really starts at the end of the acronym. So I put policy up front, so which is not surprising if you know me. From my perspective, the starting point is really DoD Directive 3005, which deals with stabilization and is currently under revision for the first time since 2018. Reorienting that policy directive away from the GFA and SAR and back toward its earlier doctrinal links with irregular warfare would help stabilization planners tap into the innovations in the IW sector that have taken place over the past 4 to 5 years, and also help contextualize stabilization as a warfighting function. Putting defense back in the lead and with proper C2 for the first time in decades would be consistent with the warrior ethos and allow DoD to redefine stabilization on its own terms as the supported agency, not in support of others. In terms of doctrine, the proposed reorientation would close the conceptual gap between warfighting, with DoD capable and clearly in the lead, and stabilization, with multiple agencies either incapable or unwilling to lead, plan, and execute. One place to turn for doctrinal innovations is the same thing we've been talking about all day, the NATO resilience concept, and NATO's designation of civil military operations as a joint function that's really centered around civil affairs. In terms of organization, my insight came while I was working at the Pentagon gathering data for the latest stabilization biennial assessment. I learned that combatant commands were using joint interagency coordination groups, or JIASIGs, for all kinds of whole of government coordination on things like competition or counter-narcotics, disaster assistance, et cetera, but less so on stabilization. And that's because DoD has a supporting role, not a lead role under the GFA. But shifting from unity of effort to DoD-led unity of command would elevate opportunities for joint interagency planning on stabilization, with the TCAPs right there in a great position in most of the combatant commands to participate or even lead those groups. I mentioned this in the earlier panel, but I think the easiest way to do that is to start with what I would call the nearest neighbor lines of effort, like disaster response, which has become an urgent unsolved problem, as we talked about, because USAID is gone, and the way that we've normally done it is kind of unclear. You could start there and then segue from disaster response planning into stabilization, or use resilience, in some places or irregular warfare as starting points if that makes more sense for a given command. When it comes to training, I've heard a lot about the efforts to draw civil affairs more closely toward other irregular warfare capabilities under the rubric of resilience. And I think CAA can do so, but it needs to do so without abandoning stabilization as a core function. And I think here, as per the previous presentation, the NATO resilience concept is really helpful. When it comes to material, I mentioned several ideas around authorities and appropriations already during the panel, so I won't repeat those, but I can't overemphasize enough the importance of the assessment, monitoring, and evaluation point, that when you're negotiating with Congress, you need to be able to show kind of like what the results will look like as a result of their appropriations. And fortunately, as I mentioned, we've learned a lot about AM&E together during the GFA era, and we should be bold about using that expertise in those legislative proposals that we put forward. So let me wrap up by shifting to the purple box, which highlights some of the steps civil affairs community could take to support this idea, and it'll cover the rest of the .mil PFP. In terms of asking tough questions, so that's also been a theme of what we've talked about, particularly in the chat. And I guess you have to first of all apply the golden rule of civil affairs, which is don't be weird. Find opportunity. The trick is always knowing like when to beat the drum on something like stabilization without trying to beat a dead horse. And again, I think the nearest neighbor strategy is the appropriate one. Work with those groups that are already struggling with these things that are sort of adjacent to stabilization, and then start talking about how you apply those things in a stabilization context. The next, I would challenge all of you to think creatively, in addition to the things we talked about today, about how to use routine and somewhat boring Title X processes to poke and prod this issue. One of them, which I had not actually really thought about until hearing all of this, is the information requests that you get, where people are actually trying to get feedback on certain policies or certain ideas, all those different things that kind of get sent out to the community from, SD policy or others for inputs. But also you can submit wargaming suggestions to the Joint Staff J7, which is something Civil Affairs has done a little bit, but could do a lot more looking at some of those contingencies I talked about earlier. And then, of course, pitching legislative proposals to OSD policy, which is responsible for pulling a lot of those together. My observation is that that approach is more effective when the suggestions are coming from multiple disparate sources, like several combatant commands all at once. But the TCAP network that I've seen in operation is a great way of trying to sort of coordinate stuff like that so that you could stage manage these kinds of questions through that network. The silver lining that I mentioned there just refers to, I think, Ciara's first point, which is that almost everybody that has been doing stabilization at state, USAID, U.S. Institute for Peace, and all these other organizations are now available as hired guns. This is very self-serving. But the point is, it's also a buyer's market because there's a lot of supply out there. Hopefully it won't be for long, but while it is now, you have a lot of folks that are available to help kind of solve some of these issues. And then finally, just be ready, because the world is inherently unstable these days. And it's my belief that there's nobody better than civil affairs when it comes to the expertise and can-do attitude we'll need to respond when things inevitably go south. And that is all I have. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. All right, we're going to go into our fifth and last paper, Redefining Civil Affairs, A Call for Modernization by Major John McElligott, Sergeant Major Robert Bruce, and Major Chris Antonov.
Excellent, sir. Major McElligott here. Well, that's just loading right now. Quick combo check with Sergeant Major Bruce.
And John, you're going to want to flip. We're seeing your notes slide, not your, so you want to flip screen.
Okay.
Open display settings.
Okay, here we go.
Just go straight up with the cursor, display settings.
It disappeared on me. This one here?
Yep, hit the swap and then it should change our view.
Ah, so cool.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Sergeant Major Bruce, are you there?
Major McElligott, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay.
And Major Antonov.
You're loud and clear.
Excellent. So thank you everyone for your time. As you can see, we've got a team effort here for this presentation. Major McElligott here in Germany, joined by Sergeant Major Bruce and Major Antonov, who's dialing in from Spain. I'm on orders here in Army Europe and Africa. Sergeant Major Bruce is currently serving as the J9 Sergeant Major at Security Assistance Group Ukraine, and Major Antonov, who's hailing from the Marine Corps Reserve, had finished his tour as the Deputy J9 at SAG-U. So we took a truly .mil PF kitchen sink approach to this problem and redefining civil affairs, modernizing it going forward. We're going to highlight just one or two recommendations per category, but it's really important to frame why this matters. We're trying to maximize our ability for civil affairs to influence effects, to deliver those influence effects, to integrate with other warfighting functions, and contribute to strategic objectives. We think that the recommendations that we're going to present tonight and then publish in the paper are feasible, and we think that the recommendations will help to close the gap between today's CA forces and future conflict. Sergeant Major, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Good day, everyone. I'll start us off with our recommendations to personnel and training. Our recommendations to personnel is to reduce the overall size of the force, be more selective, and enhance quality of our personnel. We argue a smaller force with larger CA teams would better support the Army's division-centric force. Based on lessons from the Ukraine war and plans for large-scale combat operations, we argue it would enhance CA teams' capability and survivability to have a medic and a specialist trained in UAS and counter-UAS for improved sustainment, recon, and protection. Fewer but larger CATs will better support the shift to larger formations. Next slide, sir. I'll highlight two of our several recommendations for training. First, we advise replicating the 95th CA Brigade's Advanced Skills Detachment Training Model across the components. The ADS used mobile training teams of NCOs to instruct companies and battalions. This ASD model includes tactics, mobility, combatives, CKI, counter-UAS, counter-IED, and civil recon to build on the basics of shoot, move, communicate, medicate, and decontaminate. Second, we recommend an integrated CKI system that categorizes searchable information, integrates with an AI-supported COP, and uses modern tools to shift through data for civil considerations to find and summarize what's relevant to the supported commander. We can deliberate whether AI is a military revolution or a revolution in military affairs. Either way, it's a game changer for the military, and civil affairs needs to harness the AI applications that will help inform the commanders on civil considerations and why they matter to the current and future operations. I'll go ahead and turn it over now to Major Antonov.
Thanks, Sergeant Major. So when it comes to organization, a key theme is our integration of civil affairs with the other information warfare elements, namely PSYOPs and IO forces. And really the focus of that is to generate the non-kinetic combined arms effects. I would argue from my experience, just coming back from deployment with SAG-U, is that a J9 or G9 construct naturally puts civil affairs on an island when it comes to the larger staff. We're better fitted to be within a J39 construct underneath the 3 to make us a more relevant commodity to the larger operations. Next slide. When it comes to leadership and education, I think a key thing that we've observed is a lot of personnel that actually go forward on deployment from the reserve component are not prepared for it adequately to really execute and represent the community in a proper way to the larger staff. The first recommendation we have is that any personnel going forward should have completed their MOS specific PME. Also, it would be great if they could have their at-grade PME completed as well. But we know the challenges there, especially for officers. But really, MOS-specific PME should be completed, and that should be a non-negotiable before anyone goes forward. There's a great course the Marine Corps has put together, which is the MACTF Operations and the Information Environment Practitioner course that now lives within the Marine Corps Civil Affairs Schoolhouse in Quantico. We believe that that course should be evolved into a much more joint-facing course, really tailored to the Army as well as the Marine Corps, and should be definitely a top requirement for field grade officers as well as staff NCOs. And really the focus there is we need to have mature trained professionals that are systems thinkers that can truly be value add for optimized non-kinetic fires to the commander. Next slide. And that ties into doctrine. Again, this continues the theme. It really comes down to hybrid warfare. And hybrid warfare is a fancy term that everyone uses and not everyone understands, kind of like AI. And I would say that the thing that we can do about it is just like with AI, it is training. It is training our people and update our doctrine to clearly define what is hybrid warfare. What are those influence capabilities that we're facing from our near peer competitors who are expert at hybrid warfare? And really, where do we fit in? We fit in to partnering with IO, PSYOP, PAO, and Intel for targeting to counter hybrid warfare capabilities and really bring a combined arms non-kinetic targeting capability to a joint commander. That is where our doctrine should be focused. Major McElligott, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Chris. So we've argued for modern CAA or civil knowledge and integration systems. These require software licenses, programs like we've talked about before, Maven Smart System that has AI-enabled tools. It requires adequate cloud storage and contractor support to create data layers and dashboards until our own troops can build sufficient expertise to develop and maintain those CKI systems. We think that we need Maven or something like it across all formations, tactical, operational, strategic, Compo 1, Compo 3, so we can share civil affairs, operations, activities, and investments with the units that are above, below, and adjacent to us. You can find, once you have access to an account, you can find stuff across different OARs even. This ties to the mission partner network with allies and partner forces. For example, where I work at the Army Service Component Command here in Europe, we have Maven Smart System that is on multiple enclaves, including Cypranet, as well as the MPN network, and that ties in with Colonel Schäfer and our other allies here in Europe. We're getting on the same page across NATO formations. In terms of policy, we want policies that ensure funding for certificate programs in relevant fields. We think that it's really important to invest in our skilled workforce. We have excellent people in CA, like our other colleagues talked about earlier. We should build the level of expertise internal to our organizations. We think this will help with recruitment and retention as well, and to help to redefine civil affairs for the modern battlefield. To wrap this up, we were asked to redefine civil affairs. We think that by going through some of these recommendations, we think they're feasible and acceptable to senior leaders, or should be. We can harness these massive shifts that are happening in the Department of War. We think there's a window of opportunity right now to modernize civil affairs. And then we want to make this a reality. So we are raising our hands to volunteer to take some of these concepts to our home units, to test them out, and to see what's feasible. We want to thank you for your time. Thank you so much to the CAA Association. It's clear that that this is a learning organization. It's clear that we've got a lot of expertise across, whether in uniform or civilian. Thanks so much for your time. This concludes our brief, pending your questions and comments.
All right, guys. Thanks very much. Great job. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was all 5 papers presented. Again, you should have the means and methods to casting your votes.
It should have just
And,
popped up on your screen.
Yeah.
And you can pick,
Yeah.
reminder, you can pick 3 of the 5. There was no way for me to limit you picking 3, so technically you can pick all 5. So do your best.
And good luck to the winners, and we will present those. While you're doing your voting, I just want to personally thank the papers committee who did a lot of work in reading, again, a lot of papers this year and grading and scoring them and debating them. So we highly encourage this, and next year we hope to get a similar response. It was really good. And I personally want to just call out Chris Holchek for doing such a great job. And oftentimes, like when I was in Ukraine, he would step in my shoes, and we could not have done this effort without him. So kudos especially to him.
Got about 50 votes in, so we're going to give it a few more minutes.
Carolyn, how do you pick this up? I'm not getting it.
It should have popped up on your screen. I saw you put a text chat in, so you may have a screen behind your Zoom screen that might have just hidden itself. So if you minimize your Zoom screen, you might see the poll sitting behind it.
Carolyn, you want to start the Jeopardy theme?
I feel like I should. It's I will say the votes are slowing down. It came in wildfire in the beginning.
You made it easy. You put it right in front of us, so
we're almost at
no excuses.
We're at 57 out of 80 participants, but I know there's a few of us that aren't voting. We'll give it another 30 seconds. It'll be a full 3 minutes of voting then. And looks like we're just about wrapping up they're trickling
Carol, if I can
now.
throw in a public service announcement here, since you're all being good at voting, a reminder to the association members that the voting for 2026 officers also went out a couple of hours ago. We're up to about 80 votes that have come in out of the 2,100 that were sent out. So we need a few more.
Yeah, that one it came by. I think I received a text and an email. So depending on how you're in the system, you may have both ways, and it takes you out to an election, almost like a Survey Monkey kind of thing.
And Chris Stocco here. For the first time for the board of directors, we have more candidates than slots available. So you get to click on the information about each person and make an informed decision. Just a PSA there.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We did add for every officer and director nominee a bio and photo, so people could, have an informed decision on those individuals. And yes, we actually had 15 people nominated against 12 positions, so that's great.
And so just a reminder for anyone that presented today, including the paper presentations, if you could please send your slides, if you had any, to Chris Holchek and myself, Caroline Pogge. There's an email our emails are both in a comment that Chris made earlier. But if for any other reason, just send it to Nomia Journal. We will also get it that way. And then we will be posting both the videos of the events today, as well as some transcripts and summary points in the coming days behind the firewall of CAA's website. So you should have access to all of that in addition to obviously prior years. And then just a plug, we will be going into our virtual meeting in April back onto our schedule, and we intend to be back in person next fall. We're still working through that. We're going to commit to dates and locations at the board meeting tomorrow, so you should see that coming soon. So General Goddard, I think I'm going to call it. We have 62 votes, and our top three, making sure I got this one right. So our top
count it
vote,
down. Third place, second place, first place.
Oh, somebody's getting a last sneak vote in there, but it did not change the change. All right, let me end the poll. And so our top votes goes to Major Shawn Blaydes and team for organizing large-scale combat ops. Our second place goes to Major McElligott and team for redefining civil affairs. And third place, and these were all pretty narrow between the spaces. So the third place goes to Ryan McCannell for seizing the initiative. So great job to everyone that submitted in the top three. So again, Major Blaydes' team, Major McElligott's team, and then Ryan in third.
Okay, well, good job by every.
Oop, General Goddard just froze on my end.
I would be remiss if I didn't say, if you want to be involved in the papers committee process next year, email me, Glenn A. Goddard at Parsons. We'll again repeat this next year, and I look forward to having some of you that wrote papers this year be on the committee to help evaluate them next year.
So, sir, I think you broke up for a sec, but the short version of what he said is if you want to participate in the committee next year, please email him, General Goddard's email, and we'll get that out to the group if you don't have it. And obviously, if you are a writer, we encourage you to consider writing again next year.
Hey, Carolyn Christopher here. Hey, a lot of people had a lot of comments about outreach and they're doing it individually and stuff. Please email me. I put my information in the chat. I'd like to coordinate all those things and either present at the board or do a separate presentation once I can roll up who's talking to whom about what topics. So we're actually talking about relevant topics that the Army's actually talking about. So thank you.
And sir, I'm going to pass it over to you. I hit most of my closing remarks while we were waiting for the tallies.
Carolyn, thanks very much. And specifically, let me call out Chris Holschek and Glenn Goddard for helping out with making this possible. This was a case of making lemonade out of lemon. We had about 85 people total involved with this today. That's not bad for a last minute changeover like this. So to all of you that took the time to participate, to listen in on this, thank you very much. This is an important year for the Civil Affairs Corps, for the Civil Affairs Association, and continued involvement by all our members and by those partners that have been long-standing parts of the community. We really thank everyone for your continued inclusion in this dialogue, and we are very much looking forward to the next events coming up. So please keep your eyes peeled for announcements coming out for the next events coming up as well. And we will be voting at the next board meeting, which is tomorrow, on where we'll hold this next year. Although I will say we held on to the Reagan Library money that we put in for holding that location. So that'll be a discussion point. I'm actually sitting here looking at the Reagan Library out my window. Not a bad place. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Carolyn, back over to you.
So I just added the General Goddard's email for the paper committee in the your Gmail. That was the right one, right, sir?
Yeah, you got it.
Perfect. So if you have interest in joining the paper committee next year, that is his email to express interest there. And then any presentations or notes that you want to share with Chris Holschek and myself, that email is also in there. So please reach out and continue to participate. And we should have the call for papers topic out in the early spring, in the springtime like we usually do. So you've got the summer to do your writing. And we encourage you to buddy up with other folks and encourage your enlisted and junior officers and some other folks that are coming up through the ranks or they're in the trench, so to speak, to write about what they want to write about. It's a great way to get the forum out. The papers are published and they are distributed pretty broadly across the force and in other places to the COCOMs, to the CAR's office, a lot of places. So it really gets some visibility out with your ideas and gets some things percolating for folks that may not have considered those perspectives. So highly encourage you to participate in that way. And we will have, like I said, roll-ups of this will be coming out on the association's website. And you will also see the call for the April event. If you have topics and or speakers that you'd like to see in the April roundtable, please let us know. I'd be happy to think about what topics make sense for that group. And if you've got speakers, it makes my life a whole lot easier. So I do appreciate it. So please reach out. And for those of you, hopefully good night to the Europeans, and have a great day to the rest of the crowd.